Okay, hello and welcome back to the Do the Work podcast. It's Dale here, the Do the Work coach, and I'm joined here today by another lovely guest, and we've got a really good topic to discuss. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of info about who we've got today, and then I'm going to let her also introduce herself, and then we'll have a really interesting conversation for sure. And today's topic is sleep. So today I have Teresa DeNike, I think I've got that right, or DeNike, my apologies. And Teresa is a registered clinical sleep educator and the founder of SleepBetterNYC. The sleep coaching programs help clients achieve realistic goals dependent upon their individual sleep situation. She's worked with hundreds of sleep clinicians who have treated thousands of patients and realizes there is a tremendous need for sleep health education. So SleepBetterNYC was created for coaching and care coordination. With expertise in sleep apnea, recovery, and mindset, the coaches provide support that fits into the client's lifestyle while collaborating with other healthcare and wellness professionals. Teresa is based in Brooklyn, New York. First person, by the way, on the podcast from New York. But her small team is able to work with clients across the country virtually. Other passions include boxing, enjoying the NYC lifestyle with her husband, and a good bourbon or rosé. So welcome to the podcast, Teresa. How are you today?
Good. Thanks so much for having me, Dale. I'm excited to be here.
No, thank you very much for coming on. Sleep's a really important topic that I sort of try and get across to my clients, and sometimes don't mean this in a derogatory way to you, but I'm sure you hear this. It's not something they take that much of an importance of until you really raise it. So I think, as we were just talking kind of beforehand, to hear it from an expert and not just me as a coach, for example, for my clients and the people that follow me, will be really, really useful for them. What I want to know first of all is because it's quite a rogue sort of thing to get into. It's a little bit different, if you will. What led you down this path?
That is a great question. It sort of goes along with what you were just saying, is that literally everybody sleeps and everybody thinks about sleep and everybody talks about sleep, but we're just not really paying attention to it. We take it for granted, I guess, for lack of a better word. The last few years, I've actually been working with sleep companies, manufacturers and things like that, which is how I got involved with a lot of dentists and physicians. And in working with these clinicians, the patients that would come in were so sick, and they were desperate, and they had been sick for years. And yet, basically anybody I would talk to, friends and family and friends of friends, when they found out I was in sleep, they wanted to talk about it. And so there's this huge gap between everyday people and people who are actually going to the doctor. So I really just wanted to help bridge that gap. I was talking about sleep all day, every day for work and with my friends. And so I figure I might as well learn more, took some courses, got a credential, and here I am.
Nice. I like it. As I say, I sort of have a great interest in sleep personally, in the sense of I just love sleep, and I've been very lucky, to be fair. Generally speaking, I sort of tend to sleep pretty well. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is I actually think that's as a result of how I kind of set my life up and all the rest of it. So I think it's easy for people to say, oh, I'm not a good sleeper, or I'm not a morning person, or, whatever that might be. And I think, just like with weight loss, there's a lot of things that we can sort of get a handle on and take control on to try and set ourselves up the best we can to have the best quality sleep. So hopefully today's conversations is going to go to kind of help people understand that there are things that they can kind of do to improve it. What would you say is, just to sort of kick us off, what would you say are sort of the common problems that you tend to come across? Like, are there any easy wins that people can do to try and improve it?
Yes and no. I think there's a really fine line between trying to do it all yourself and not speaking to a professional. Again, of course, I'm biased because I am a professional, but you can't get all your answers from Google and Instagram. So we'll say that first. I also think that we really need to focus on the little habits. We don't realize how big of a difference they can make in our lives. I'll have people come to me and say, I have tried absolutely everything, but they haven't, maybe gotten blackout blinds, or they drink a glass of wine every night before bed, or they haven't asked their doctor about the prescriptions they take and how it affects their sleep. Now, again, those things sound basically meaningless. But if you compound them and you're doing these things every day, they actually make a really big difference. And so just knowing that these little habits can really improve your life can already help to change your mindset and make things a little easier.
Yeah, amazing. I'm going to home in on one thing that I think a lot of people are going to really be able to, relate to, or what have you. The best way to phrase it is you touched on alcohol there and drinking alcohol. So how much of that, or how much can that have an impact on sleep duration, sleep quality, and then what sort of impact can that have on people, I suppose, the following day as well in terms of their energy levels?
That's a great question. And I think that alcohol is probably the most commonly used sleep aid. But I cannot stress enough that it is not a sleep aid. Um, yes, of course, if you go to the internet, they're going to tell you, okay, cut out alcohol and you'll be great. But let's be honest. I mean, I'm not cutting out alcohol. I don't think a lot of people want to. So I think it's important just to know why it can affect your sleep. So yes, it can make you feel sleepy. It can be a sedative. It can knock you out or make you feel drowsy. A lot of people, drink it to sort of take the edge off at the end of the day. Those things are all true. Of course, we've experienced it. But what you don't really realize is that when you are asleep, the sleep architecture or the stages of sleeping are all messed up. So what happens when alcohol is being processed in your body? First, it's going to suppress your REM sleep. So that is a super active sleep stage where your brain is consolidating memories, it is flushing out toxins, it is saving short-term memory into long-term memory. It's also helping it's when you dream, it helps you with your emotional responses. And so first that's suppressed. And then the alcohol processes through your body and you get into lighter stages. And you might wake up a few times, you might go to the bathroom, you might get into these crazy dreams because your body is trying to rebound and it's trying to be super effective in catching up, but you can't catch up. You can't catch up sleep that you have missed. So the next day, even if you spend 8-9 hours in bed, you really didn't get the quality sleep that you needed. That's why the day after, the nap feels so good because you're still exhausted because you didn't get the stages of sleep that you needed. And that can affect you really if you just have, 1 or 2 glasses of wine. So in talking about these habits, if you can't give that up, maybe just do it earlier, or maybe do one less.
Okay, that's interesting. So just what you finished on there with regards to do it earlier. So what you mean is maybe have a drink earlier, let the effects wear off before you go to bed, rather than having a, inverted commas, nightcap, or potentially having a drink late on, perhaps with your food that you eat or what have you. Because I think it is, as you say, a very common thing. Finish work late at night, chill out, relax, and enjoy that. And you think it helps you sleep, then potentially it doesn't. And also you mentioned about the longer lasting effects, and I guess as you get older, it gets harder, right? When you get hangovers anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Let's not pretend that we're not all hungover anymore after you hit 30, or some start sooner. I think we know alcohol is a diuretic too. It's going to dehydrate you. When you sleep, a little bit of dehydration is totally normal, but if you add alcohol to that, and I think we pretty much all know that dehydration can lead to a whole host of other things that are not pleasant.
Yeah. And then obviously it's the impact the following day, isn't it? And you mentioned even, 1 or 2 glasses of wine, you might not think it's having an impact, but it is having an impact. And from what I'm aware of and what I know from the work that I do, that can have a massive impact on the hormones that control appetite as well. So could you maybe give the listeners a little bit of information about how it can impact those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. When we consider the blood alcohol level, sometimes it seems like really low, but you're not supposed to drive. And what we're saying is that you can't really tell what your brain is doing, even if you don't feel it. So even if you just have 1 or 2 glasses, if you're the kind of person who's not having good sleep, then that could be a reason. I'm not saying it is for everybody, but that could definitely be a reason for that, whether you feel it or not. And the reason it affects your hormones really goes back to the sleep staging and different levels of sleep that you do or do not get with the alcohol. So it's not that the alcohol is messing with your hormones, for example. It's just that you're not getting into these levels of sleep that you need. And in those levels of sleep is when those hormones are released or produced. And so that's where it really gets a little tricky to act as a normal human being the next day.
Yeah. And then that's where it leads to, for the listeners listening, they're very aware of, the calorific breakfast the next day and potentially the sort of, sweet sort of hedonic style foods, because, your appetite isn't in the most ideal place based on what happened the night before. So one thing that kind of really sort of segues nicely into there is you've done a post around how bedtime routines are quite common now. Like, you should do this before you go to sleep and wind down, this, that, and the other. But you talked about how that actually begins the morning before you go to sleep. So it kind of leads nicely onto that there. So we're talking about potentially, drinking a little bit earlier and all those sorts of things. So why is that important? And what would you recommend to do to set that up well for a good night's sleep in the morning?
I do think a good night's sleep starts with the beginning of your day. And a lot of it has to do with habits and mindset. You said before that you are very lucky. You typically sleep very well. You set up your day in a certain way. And I think that mindset has this way of sort of providing these self-fulfilling prophecies. The more you think about something, the shorter the neural pathways in your brain actually get. So it's a lot easier for you to accept it as the truth. So when you wake up in the morning, you really have to start preparing your brain for the rest of your day and preparing for sleep. And it's about habits. So we know that before we go to bed, we should do sort of the same thing every night to prepare our brain, to trigger it, to think, okay, after I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to sleep. And in the morning, it's sort of the same to prepare your body to think, okay, after I wake up and open the blinds and have my coffee, then it's time to start the day. Now, that also helps in adding to your routine and adding hydration and sunlight and movement. Those are all things, not just to check off your list, but they actually help with your circadian rhythm. Light, for example, I always say get as much light as possible as soon as you wake up, not just to jolt your body, but because it actually triggers chemicals in your brain and it stops melatonin production. And I think a lot of people know that melatonin makes us sleepy. So we're going to want to stop that as soon as we wake up, which is why I always recommend opening the blinds, going outside, getting your vitamin D, and adding that into your routine, which again sounds sort of almost too easy, but you don't really think about it unless someone's telling you to look outside or step out onto your balcony for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I guess if you stumble out of bed in the dark, brush your teeth in the dark, sort of mope around a little bit, fumble around, find your clothes for work, get into the car in the dark, and then go. You're not feeling particularly woke, are you, at that point? So although it sounds simple, it's kind of, somebody could say to me, well, actually, what you're telling me to do for weight loss is simple. Well, it is simple, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy and you know exactly what to do, I suppose. You mentioned circadian rhythm there. Now, one point I sort of try and hammer down with my clients on is circadian rhythm and how I try to get them to get as much continuity from Monday to Friday to the weekends as well. And maybe correct me if this is kind of a good way to explain this, but for the people that sort of, go to bed maybe 10 p.m., wake up at 6 during the week, and the weekends stay up till 2 and then get up at, whatever time. What they've done is, in my head, as I see it, they've kind of shifted when they go to bed. So when they go to bed, has shifted. The body clock or the circadian rhythm is all over the place, as I see it, which is why they get tired and then they struggle to recover Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday as they get back into that rhythm. And I kind of relate this to almost like kind of being in a different time zone. So like you're kind of getting jet lag and confusing your body. Is that a fair assessment of what happens when there's a lot of change over the weekend?
It is definitely. I mean, with just one night of poor sleep or if you pull an all-nighter, which I guess is sort of uncommon now, but if you pull an all-nighter, your reaction times can slow by up to 300%. I mean, that's just one facet of what happens. So think about if you're doing that every single weekend or even just one night a week. I think that all humans, and I mean most living creatures in general, we have this circadian rhythm and we seek patterns and continuity and regularity, and it helps with every bodily function. And so when you get that regularity during the week and then you change it during the weekend, you might feel like, oh, I'm treating myself, I'm sleeping in, or maybe you're out at a party or something, and that's all fine and well, but you have to understand that it's going to affect you. When you shift, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, you're shifting when your body is restoring and when your brain is functioning and consolidating these memories and releasing certain hormones, which again, we keep saying, but I think it really affects your weight loss in general too.
Yeah. I think great point. And it comes back to the idea of this being such an important topic to talk about, in the sense of it impacts absolutely everything. Like you mentioned there, reaction time, I think you said, which is 300% more from doing an all-nighter, which is definitely rare for me, but it probably happens with some people. I don't think I can do that anymore.
I don't think so either.
I don't think I can really do it at my peak, to be fair. I know some people can. One other thing you mentioned, sort of talking about like stats and percentages on one of your posts, was that with a poor quality night's sleep, you're 60% more likely to react emotionally to something. So could you give a little bit more on that for us?
Sure. Yeah. So when you're sleeping, when you're in a deeper sleep or REM sleep, the most active part of your brain is called the amygdala, which is super emotional. And it also sort of shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is logical. So this, might explain why some of your dreams seem really crazy, but this amygdala is doing all this work for you and helping to sort out your emotions and helping to, what it thinks is, provide solutions, although it ends up just being crazy dreams for most. But interestingly enough is that when you are sleep deprived, your amygdala sort of goes a little crazy when you're awake too. So you are a more emotionally reactive, you have quicker judgments, you might be a little bit on edge. I think we've all been moody after sleep, but we just don't really know why. It's not just because we're uncomfortable and tired, it's because our brain is literally wired to just make quick judgments when we're sleep deprived. And to that, sleep deprivation is actually defined as consistently 6 hours or less. And I feel like a lot of people listening, or people in general, will say, well, what are you talking about? I sleep 6 hours or less all the time. I feel totally normal. I'm functioning. And we have to really think about, how are we functioning at that 6 hours or less? Maybe we're not completely exhausted, but there's literally no way to optimize your performance or your weight loss if you are consistently sleeping 6 hours or less. It's just not the way the body and the brain is designed.
So I've got a few questions on that, actually. The first one I'm going to ask is, so if someone is saying they're functioning okay on less than 6 hours sleep because they're used to it, is there any truth or evidence to support the fact that that could be kind of like a bit of a silent killer, in the sense of, okay, well, you might feel okay now, but is that lack of sleep and the lack of poor quality sleep, can that catch up on you sort of long term, would you say? Are there any impacts there?
Yes, it definitely can. And a quick note, there are some people with a gene that allows them to sleep less than 6 hours. So some people might think that that's them, but it's less than 1% of people. So it's most likely not you. If you're getting that, you just really need more sleep. But yeah, long-term is really where we see the problem. I don't want to scare anyone and telling them all these horrible things that happen to your body when you don't get sleep. Overnight, it's not going to really do anything horrible to you, or over a few weeks, you'll be fine. We'll work on it, get a sleep coach. But long-term effects are quite scary. I mean, sleep apnea alone is directly related to increased risk of heart attack and stroke. Sleep deprivation, there was a study that came out, I believe it was just a few months ago, and it was actually in like mainstream media as well, about Alzheimer's being directly affected to people who consistently slept 6 hours or less, who are over 65. During REM sleep, we have this sort of flush of toxins in our brains, and if we don't get enough of those out, these plaques build up and they can cause Alzheimer's. So yeah, over time, it can be directly related to a lot of medical conditions, and it can even exacerbate conditions that you already have. I'm not saying poor sleep is going to cause diabetes, but it can make those symptoms worse.
Okay, let's stay there. So I think it's important to get these messages out there and the long-term risk of stuff. I do think it's not spoken about enough. And you mentioned one thing that I don't think is spoken about enough, and you mentioned sleep apnea. And this is something that, not specifically, but snoring was something that a client mentioned to me recently. So I'd love to get your kind of take on the cause of snoring, where that can take you long-term in terms of long-term risks, and potentially what you can do to, improve it.
I'm really happy you asked this. I think that sleep apnea is so underdiagnosed and under talked about. We see snoring as being sort of normal and something that just happens when you get older. We have this idea of some overweight middle-aged man who snores and potentially has sleep apnea, but we don't realize that it can literally be anybody nowadays. About 1 in 5 people have sleep apnea, and only about 20% of those people ever get treatment for it. Now, snoring is a super common way to know if you have sleep apnea, but not everybody who snores has sleep apnea. It is sort of unlikely, but one doesn't indicate the other. And, I would never diagnose someone saying that. But if you think about snoring, there has to be a reason that you're snoring. There's a reason that your airway is making that noise at night, and it's because it's being blocked. Your airway is being blocked, it's being restricted all night. And at the very basic level, what does that mean? It means that you're not getting enough air, you're not getting enough oxygen, you're not expelling enough CO2, and that wreaks havoc on your body all night long. It causes your heart to race, it can cause you to stop breathing over and over again. And so it's really important to recognize and see a doctor about that and get treated. The great news about sleep apnea is that it is highly treatable and pretty easy. There are a lot of different options for it, but people just don't get treatment because they don't really know that it is a serious condition.
So I guess what you're saying is someone who, if, someone's partner is giving them a nudge or a kick or a punch or whatever it might be in the night because they snore quite a lot, would you suggest that it's highly likely, let's phrase it like that they could have sleep apnea?
It is highly likely. It is pretty common for a lot of people to snore if they're sick or when they're drinking a little too much, if they're laying on their back. That's all mostly due to gravity. Our airway is right here. We don't have a lot of muscle around it. So when we're laying on our back or when we're drinking and our muscles are a little bit more relaxed, they tend to restrict and sort of close in on itself. Extra weight on your neck, even if it's muscle, can also just physically make it close at night because of gravity. But if it's more than that, if it's frequent, if it's every night, if it is shaking the house, there's really no instance in which that is ever normal. And it's really important that you see a doctor about it.
Would you say it's normally linked to, you mentioned people that are overweight, would you say being overweight is one of the prerequisites for leading you down that path?
It's definitely more common for people who are overweight.
Yeah.
But it is also common, well, not common, but we also see it in young, healthy people because of the shape of their mouths and their airways who are just small. A 90-pound female marathon runner might have a very narrow mouth and airway. And so she might have sleep apnea, although more commonly we see it get worse with age and with weight.
Yeah. And I've read a few things around this and listened to a few different people. And there are people linking, don't know how much you're aware of this, but linking being a mouth breather to this leading to, snoring and sleep apnea. And then the longer term risks potentially being things like type 2 diabetes and hypertension. Is that something you're aware of? Am I on the right path in understanding that?
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes when people are screening for sleep apnea, they'll see if you have high blood pressure or drug-resistant high blood pressure. And that's because when you're sleeping, your heart is working really, really hard to try to navigate all this breathing and not breathing. So that's where the hypertension is worsened. But the mouth breathing is really, really important. And it's something that we can think about during the day too, which I really love. If you are, well, first, your nose is for breathing and your mouth is for eating. There's really no reason, unless you're sick or unless you're sprinting, perhaps, for you to breathe through your mouth. Our body is designed to breathe through our nose. And so if you can't do that, when you're sick, or if you have a deviated septum, or if you are struggling to breathe because of sleep apnea, then you develop this habit of breathing through your mouth. And of course, when you're sleeping, you can't really help it, which is probably why people design mouth tape and all sorts of other things. But they are pretty directly related, and it can even affect the way your face grows and your jaw grows. People who have been mouth breathing for a really long time, their jaw kind of sits back a little bit, and you might not notice unless you're looking at them from the side, but any sleep professional will be able to point you out right away as being a mouth breather and potentially having sleep apnea. And also, if your jaw is what they would call retrognathtic, it's back a little bit, that's one more thing back in your airway that can cause a blockage that can cause sleep apnea.
Yeah, so that's sort of just going to say, that's something that I was on a course maybe back end of last year, and they made a real point of how it can change the shape of your face and your teeth and things like that. And again, something that people aren't generally that aware of. And I think with the way that people are in terms of their working lives, and they're very rushed and very, what we would say, sort of in the sympathetic nervous system, sort of stressed all the time, tend to find that they're breathing through the mouths. They're probably sat a little bit how I am now, how you probably shouldn't be sat. So it's just really easy to sort of suck that air in through your mouth. So one thing I get my guys to do, and you kind of mentioned it there, is just when you sort of sat there, just actively think about, inhale nose, exhale mouth. And it sounds, again, also simple, but, look, as you've highlighted there, like, look what it can lead to if you don't get a handle on it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think nasal breathing is a really good small step to start. I, of course, am in the field, so I'm thinking about it a lot more often, but I started really paying attention when I was working out, because I figure I'm already thinking about breathing and my body. So, when you're working out, or even when you're walking, make sure that your lips are closed, put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, make sure you're breathing through your nose. And you'll start doing it more by habit and every day. And you can sort of get yourself to do it a little bit more during sleep too, if it's easier for you to do during the day, as long as you don't have some kind of nasal obstruction.
Yeah, that's a great tip, that, isn't it? Because, it's physically impossible to breathe through your nose while your tongue's not on the roof of your mouth. Another thing someone said to me is, if you look at, I remember what, it could have even been the Joe Rogan podcast, I'm not sure, but if you look at an animal in the wild, they breathe through the nose. And the way you say it, is your nose is for breathing, your mouth's for eating, which is another way of sort of highlighting that. So yeah, that's a very, very important point to stress. We're going to move from there now, because I think we've kind of got the point across. So that's a really important thing to consider, and hopefully giving the guys some useful tips to kind of improve upon that. You briefly mentioned it, I think, around getting in sunlight in the morning, and you mentioned the importance of kind of reducing the melatonin and the cortisol's there in the morning to wake us up. Now that obviously flips at night. And we have a lot of people listen to this that will lie in bed with screens in the faces and TVs on, and they'll say that they do that and it helps them relax and stuff. Is it at all possible that could help someone relax and fall asleep? Or would you absolutely categorically say that, you should have, no access to screens before bed?
I think that it is possible. I think that it's possible to help you relax. And also as a habit, if you do it every night at the same time, right before you go to bed, I believe that can help you to relax and potentially fall asleep. I think that as a coach, I sort of feel like you can't just say one thing or another, but yeah, I mean, light affects your brain and your sleep no matter what, and no matter who you are. There is a lot of talk about blue light, and it certainly does affect sleep, and it does reduce melatonin production. But I think more importantly than blue light is brightness level. So bright blue light, but also bright any light. So at nighttime, it's important to start to dim your lights or turn them off in your house. If you have to watch TV in bed, which I always recommend against, but if you have to, you feel like you can't give that up, then try to turn it off as soon as possible, right before you go to bed or immediately the first time you wake up, because that light is telling your brain that it could be daytime, that maybe you have to be awake. It's slowing your melatonin production down. So maybe you fell asleep, but you're probably still in light sleep. You're probably not getting into that deeper sleep, at least not right away.
Yeah. And I tend to agree with that. I'm just going to ask another question off the back of that and kind of really put you in a, not intentionally put you in a corner here, but I think what a lot of people might say to that is in this day and age when people struggle with worries and things on the mind and anxiety and stuff like that, they might say that they do keep those things on to help them switch off from a busy day or what have you. Would you still recommend to those people that they reduce that down or maybe other things that they can do to help switch their mind off and relax them?
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to change your habit is to replace it with something else. While I don't think you should have a TV or electronics in the bedroom, I'm also a regular human just like everyone else. And I have my electronics in the bedroom sometimes as well. So it'd be about just limiting it. Maybe you need your phone in your bedroom. Maybe you want to make sure you're available for, a family emergency or something. But in that case, don't put it in your bed or on your bedstand. Put it across the room on your dresser, because there's just no reason at all to check it in the middle of the night. You don't even need to check the time in the middle of the night. It really does not matter, except it could cause anxiety and it can put that light in your eyes and into your brain and wake it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, and just trying to replace it with a different habit, that is helpful. Of course, something boring like reading or folding laundry, or just something that doesn't require a lot of light. Even if you just walk around your house a little because you can't fall asleep, that's fine. Just don't turn all the lights on.
Yeah. And that's something I've heard before as well, in the sense of going for a walk when you're trying to fall asleep. And it's something that you just said as well, is if you're trying to get to sleep and you can't get to sleep, then you should take yourself out of your bedroom until you're feeling sleepy. Is that a thing? Is that a recommendation?
Yes. And I feel like that always surprises people when I tell them that if you cannot sleep, get out of bed. Our brain is always taking in this information and subconsciously, it's making all these associations. So the last thing you want your brain to do is to associate your bed with being awake and being anxious and tossing and turning. So it sounds silly. You need sleep. You're in bed. You want to sleep. But if you are wide awake, then get out of bed. And you can do this several times throughout the night if you're really struggling. I know it will not be comfortable the next day, but at least you're not conditioning your brain to see your bedroom as a place where you're awake. So I would say get up and, like I just said before, do something boring, fold some laundry, read. Well, I guess people don't have newspapers, but read something, read a magazine. But if you can, just really try not to turn on that TV.
Yeah. So what I guess from that is what you're trying to say is make sure the bedroom's where you're going to go for sleep, and obviously not so much else in there. If you're not feeling so tired, then go and do something that might help wind you down and stuff. Again, segues nicely. So another post that I saw that you put on Instagram, you mentioned that the bedroom's for sleeping, and then the other activity that you might do in there is sex. So one of the things you wrote down is you said underslept women are 2 times more likely to report lack of sexual desire or arousal. So I'd like to talk about that because I think a lot of people would maybe like to hear about it, but might not ask about it. So let's go there. Let's start with the female side of it there, because is there a reason why that's highlighted just females, first of all?
I think that females are a little bit easier to measure. They're a little bit more forthcoming, just generally speaking, about how they're feeling and minute details versus a physical reaction, which we can tell a little bit easier from men. So those studies tend to focus on that for women. It also has to do with the emotions and different hormones that we have that are, well, just different than men or at different levels than men. So the desire it's for a few reasons. It's not just, okay, you're not sleeping and instantly your libido is gone. It's that you're not sleeping and you're physically exhausted. You feel like you don't look as attractive, which is actually, there are studies on that too. I mean, some people do physically look not so great when they're tired, but people also feel like they don't look so good. So maybe they're not feeling sexy. Maybe they're not feeling like they're in the mood. They also might be dehydrated. They might be a little bit bloated. They aren't able to feel as emotionally stable because of what we talked about before. Their amygdala is making them all crazy. Maybe they're feeling a little moody. They're maybe not as nice to their partners. So those things are all going to really not make for the most romantic evening.
How much do you think, how can I phrase this question best? Do you think off the back of that then, we almost have a responsibility, I suppose, to our partners to first of all be honest about those things, but then to make sure that, you know, sleep, nutrition, everything else is in the right place to kind of look after those things. If we have that knowledge and we know that, you know, it can affect that by 2 times, do you think there's almost an important responsibility for us to get a handle on that and get a handle on the sleep?
Of course, yeah. I think you have to give yourself grace, and you have to give some grace to your partner as well, especially if you're experiencing it. I think that a lot of people who have sleep disorders of their own, maybe they don't realize that their partner also is now having these sort of secondhand effects. Maybe a man is snoring at night and his partner is not, and they are sleeping soundly, but they're actually not sleeping soundly. They're being woken up all the time. And if someone has insomnia and they're getting up over and over again throughout the night, then their partner is probably woken up too. And so it's important that they are really understanding that this is really difficult for the other person, but also that they sort of encourage them to see a doctor or make lifestyle choices that are different, or, you know, maybe they do something together at night that helps them wind down to improve their situation.
Yeah, cool. All right. And then, so we highlighted obviously that was females there. So what could be the impact on sort of sexual desire and arousal for a male who has poor quality sleep? And also, you know, away from sex as well, what impact can that have on their life?
Well, something that is instantly tied to sex, but also can be performance, and for men and women, is testosterone levels. There are studies that show men who consistently sleep less than, can't remember if it was 5 or 6 hours, have testosterone levels of a man 10 years their senior. So that can mean a 20-year-old guy who is chronically sleep deprived, his testosterone levels are as high or low as a 30-year-old man, and a 40-year-old is like a 50-year-old man.
Yeah.
Now, you know, it doesn't seem huge, but if you really think about it, I mean, 10 years is a big difference in how our bodies feel. And so that testosterone, yes, we associate it with men and sex and performance, but, you know, women have it too. And it can affect your athletic performance, as along with a few other things that bodily functions.
Yeah. So let's move from sex and let's highlight the performance thing that you talked about there, because that's interesting. So testosterone reduces, performance reduces, and linked into sort of my clients, and this will be true to females as well. Testosterone's a big important part of muscle building and growth and recovery and all that kind of stuff. So what we're saying here is, if we don't get good quality sleep, this has an impact on those levels of testosterone, and that could have an impact on the results that you're getting in the gym from your weight training, and then your recovery from that as well. So it's super important that we get a handle on it for that reason as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't just need sleep for energy and wakefulness. You need it for weightlifting ability and lung capacity and lactic acid buildup in your muscles and muscle recovery. So we're not just talking about, you know, get enough sleep so hopefully you can go to the gym the next day. It's actually, you know, your body restoring and building and doing what you want it to do, which is why you're going to the gym in the first place.
Yeah, to function optimally, I guess. So I guess then there's also we talk about the gym, we're talking about, you know, with the partners and things like that. There's also an impact that we're going to see on our sort of productivity and in work as well. And I can imagine a lot of people can kind of relate to, you know, first few hours of the day being a little bit slow, having a few coffees, like plenty of caffeine to sort of wake us up. So how much of an impact can it have on, you know, productivity at work? And I suppose shorter term, how we feel in the day, but then that's going to also have a massive impact on your performance and then potentially your career as well, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There are numbers all over the place about absenteeism because of sleep deprivation, or even what's called presenteeism, where you're there, you're working, but you're not really paying attention. Maybe you're scrolling on Instagram a little bit too much because you just can't focus on anything. If you can't focus because your brain it's still a little bit groggy, I mean, how is your production going to be? There are numbers that I've seen where per employee, let's say you have a big business, per employee, you could lose up to $5,000 a year if they have untreated sleep apnea, or $6,000 a year if they have untreated insomnia, just because either they're not coming to work, or they're not doing a lot at work, or they're just not being as productive as they could be because they just can't really focus and get things done. They're distracted. Not to mention, the car accidents and unfortunate other accidents that could happen on the way to work when you are sleep deprived.
Because they're 300% more likely to have a slow reaction time.
Exactly.
This might not be a debate for now, but an interesting thing to sort of ask about. So you mentioned there $5,000 or $6,000 reduction in productivity or what have you from that. So I suppose that begs the question: where does the responsibility lie? In my eyes, it lies with the individual, the person. But as an employer, perhaps, and I'm sure this would be great for you as a sleep coach, but should employers and could employers be doing more to educate and support people around that? What do you think?
I think so. I think more and more, especially, I guess, sort of a silver lining of the pandemic, is that employers have become a little bit more flexible in timing and meetings and things like that, in knowing that we can't all function at our best at the same time as everyone else. There are some companies now who are doing like wellness programs or incentives for their employees to go to the gym or get certain health benefits. I do some webinars for employer groups for just sleep health in general or specific to their job. I can find sleep in anything, but I can then relate it to exactly what they're doing, because it affects everyone and everything that people do. So yeah, I think that if employers want to retain their employees, then they need to be a little bit more flexible on timing and the needs of them and their mental health and their sleep health, and it's all related.
I was about to ask you a question about mental health, and you've literally just said that word. So the questions are really linked nicely today. So are you aware of, or do you know, or have you seen any sort of research or evidence to support that poor sleep could have an impact on mental health, whether it be, general mental health or sort of clinical mental health problems?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, there is a famous neuroscientist, Matthew Walker, who I love. I think he's probably talked with Joe Rogan, or he's been referenced by Joe Rogan. He says that in his 20 plus years of being in the field, he has never come across a single mental health disorder that is not impacted by sleep, and vice versa. So, if you have been diagnosed with depression, just for example, I'm not saying that your sleep is causing that depression, but it is most likely worsening it if you are not sleeping well. And conversely, we see these studies of people who have dreams or nightmares, depending on your perspective, when they're going through a really tough time or when they're experiencing depression. And people who have dreams and nightmares about that specific situation that they're in, they tend to actually resolve their depression or resolve their symptoms of depression quicker than those who do not have those dreams and nightmares about their situation. Now, it's pretty difficult to control your dreams, although there are some techniques that you can try. But the point is not really controlling them. It's just the fact that if you're prioritizing sleep and you're getting into deep sleep and REM sleep and having those dreams, that can have a positive effect on your mental health, even if you have a diagnosed disorder.
Yeah, I guess it's always going back to the sort of control the controllables. So you got to think, right, okay, the start of the week this week, or last week, sorry, I was just feeling a little bit flat. I was a little bit low in energy. I wasn't motivated to sort of train, or even wasn't really enjoying work. And that doesn't happen to me very often. But when you sort of think back, it was fairly obvious to me because I'd had a bit booze at the weekend and food and stuff. But I think for sometimes people that maybe it's less obvious and maybe they've had a few drinks and not as much bad food, but a little bit, if you go back, you can kind of ask yourself questions and go, what might have triggered me to feel that way? Is it the quality of food I've been eating? Have I slept the best I possibly can? Am I triggered by something? Am I stressed by something? And it's easy to say sometimes, oh, I feel a little bit depressed. Maybe it's just a bit of an impact of, what you've been doing previously, perhaps. So it's cool that not cool, but I think it's a good thing that we've highlighted that we can make things better with things that we can control, if that makes sense. So that's cool.
Absolutely. Right. Even if, and in identifying what those root causes are, you can also trick yourself into feeling like everything's better, I think. Of course, again, not if you have a diagnosed condition. I'm not saying that is a thing, but if you say, all right, I'm really not feeling that great. How was my sleep the last 2 days? You didn't have great sleep the last 2 days. Instead of saying, oh my God, I'm ruining my body, I'm never going to feel good again. You say, okay, well, I'm going to sleep good tonight. I'm going to sleep good tomorrow. I'm going to prioritize that. I'm going to choose to eat better and exercise a little bit and get good sleep tonight. I mean, it doesn't have to all be doom and gloom, right?
Yeah, I guess what you're doing there is you're stacking up kind of the importance of sleep against what's important to you. So, is getting healthy important? Is feeling good important? Well, if it is, then, going to bed at 10 rather than staying up and watching Netflix till midnight just for the sake of it because you can. It's like you're valuing sort of your health and how you feel more than, staying up for another couple of hours or whatever. And I think that I've tried to get my clients to do that as well with the health and fitness goals and with the weight loss goals, because people aren't always that motivated to really do it. And you've got to dig into the other benefits that you're going to get from it. And one common thing is kind of, okay, well, and I'm going to relate it back to sleep. And it's the same with weight loss. If you value family and time with your family, well, you're not going to be at your best for the time with them if you are staying up too late or you're over the place with your sleep. And in my case, if you're sort of carrying loads of weight and you're not feeling good and you're sort of generally unhealthy and low in energy. So I think it's always linking it back to what you value the most and being able to link the habits and behaviors, I suppose, with the things that maybe you don't necessarily want to do, and that can help you sort of implement them, if you will.
Right. Yeah. You need to have a goal. You need to know why you're doing these things. If someone comes to me and say, I just want to sleep better. Well, but why do you want to sleep better? In a few months, how are you going to feel? What are you going to do? Are you going to spend more time with your kids? Are you going to get that promotion? Are you going to lose 10 pounds? I mean, what are you going to do when you're sleeping so great? You need to know, because you need to have some motivation there.
So that leads me on to a good question then. When people do come to you and they say those things, what do they, and you might have a few examples of, clients that have successfully sort of transformed the way they sleep and stuff. What do they leave you feeling like?
Well, they feel great, obviously. A lot of people, I think relief is actually a feeling that I hear often. Again, it goes down to where we're all thinking about sleep and we all have some sleepless nights, and that's totally normal. But I mean, where do you get that help from? Even a new parent, for example, they basically know they're never getting any sleep, and everybody's telling them that, but nobody's talking to them about what they can do. So just being able to talk to them and talk through these small things that you can't really figure out on your own is a relief to a lot of people. A relief to know that certain things are normal, or that when they started taking this new prescription and they started sleeping poorly, they're not crazy. It is true. It is happening to them. So helping to just sort of sort out what's going on in their bodies and then in their life, I think can be a relief to them.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're allowed, well, not allowed, they're equipped to sort of go away and then live their life in a more sort of happy, positive and energetic way. And then moving into the realms of training, as we went on before, I'm sure then this is where people often get confused, I think, with kind of motivation. They kind of think maybe they're absolutely shattered because they've got, poor sleep or whatever, or they've not been eating good stuff and they don't feel motivated. And it's not that they don't feel motivated, it's that they're absolutely exhausted, not necessarily because they're working too hard, but perhaps because one common thing that people say, oh, you're overtraining. And often it can be more of a under recovering kind of thing as opposed to overtraining. Like we look at the levels that like athletes can go to and stuff. And I know we said we're going to touch on that. I suppose we didn't get there, but they can train at extreme sort of levels, but they have the right, what would you say, environment and things set up in place so that they can recover right to sort of go again. And I think we can confuse, where I was going with that, we can confuse motivation with actually things that we can control to make us then want to do what we should do and train and, you know, whatever it might be.
I agree, definitely.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap it up there. Have you got anything else you'd like to add to that?
Oh man, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot. I'm really happy about it.
I think that was amazing. I think there's a hell of a lot there for the listeners. I think we've covered some really important topics that maybe they didn't have a lot of understanding of, like, for example, sleep apnea, the sort of environment of the bedroom and things like that. So there's so much we covered. So I can only say thank you very much for coming on, for the time spent. You're the first person, I think, from New York to come on the podcast. Yay. So there we go. Not the first American, but definitely the first person from New York. So yeah, thank you very much. Where can people sort of listen to you, find out more about you, and also if they want to work with you, what do they need to do?
Perfect. So right now, my Instagram is at SleepBetterNYC, no dots, no underscores. My website is sleepbetter.nyc, so it's not .com. You can go there for most of the information. It is under construction right now because we're getting involved with a few different apps and programs. But if you reach out there in any way, we will contact you and get you a consult and then talk about the different options from there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, that's a wrap for today. So guys, thank you very much for tuning in. If you found that useful, as I say, you've got all the details there. All the information will be in the show notes as well. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a review or provide some feedback. And that just allows us to continue to get more amazing guests like yourself today, Teresa, and continue to run the podcast. So yeah, thank you. Take care and peace out.
Thank you.